Chris, we're back. This will be the last podcast before the Republican convention. So I think we have to do all of our prognosticating on what's going to happen in the convention. As I was sharing with you before we started recording, I will be in Milwaukee for the convention, which I'm very excited about. I wonder how well do you think my provocatively moderate stance is going to play at the convention?
Not at all.
It's not going to be warmly received.
No, conventions are about true believers, but the last thing a convention is about truth and belief. Conventions are all about like pure power and like maneuvering yourself to get a plum, to get a goodie, to get a position, to get, a nod or something. I mean, but they pretend that it's all kind of like, you're going into the Cardinals chamber to pray and elect the new pope. And it's exactly the opposite. Right. It's all kind of like, greasy little political hardball stuff about whose seat is 2 rows in front of me and why is that delegation seated over there. But it's really fun. I mean, it's really fun.
I love that you said that, because what I realize is that's one of the key motivators for doing Fantasy Elect for me, is that I have realized that I have a obsessive interest in power and in the way power structures play out. And you brought up the papal voting once the Pope dies, and it is very similar. We do this thing as humans where we have to wrap up our pure power plays in this veil of higher calling in order to make it palatable. But it truthfully is literally just power plays, and we have to pretend as if we're true believers in order to game that system, right? Or am I misreading it? Maybe I'm misreading it. But that's how it seems.
It's exactly it. And again, it's nothing nefarious. It's just the way people are. And I always say, like, one of the big jokes is that, for years, even though they're changing it somewhat, Democrats had Jefferson Jackson Day dinners, which was the annual party fundraiser stuff for local fundraisers. And if you could find 2 guys on like the opposite ends of the spectrum, that fucking Andrew Jackson and Thomas Jefferson, they've got nothing in common.
Totally.
And Republicans, have Lincoln Day dinners. And, if you want to look about the populism of Lincoln and the radicalism of Lincoln, both economically and socially, has no resemblance to fucking the Republican Party of today. And, but we celebrate those and we kind of put this cast on that, this is the true lineage of our party. It goes through Thomas Jefferson and Andrew Jackson or Abraham Lincoln, when it's not, but we like to do that because we like that myth and it's fun. Yeah. I mean, you feel good about it. So there's nothing wrong with that.
Even a step further, there's a book that I want to read, and it's been hard for me to find it. And you and I personally may have talked about it before, but the premise of the book is that the founding of our country was actually started because of illegal smuggling, and it's called Smugglers and Patriots. But the Tax Act, according to this book, was actually put in place to prevent illegal smuggling of goods. And the smugglers, who are founders beyond maybe the big names, George Washington wasn't involved, but some of the lower level Boston Tea Party type people were actually these illegal smugglers, the same as coyotes running people from Mexico to the U.S. today, or running drugs, right? Like, the same thing, just it was of their time. So it was maybe tea, or it was something else. It was illegal cotton. I have no idea, right? And they were just avoiding paying taxes on it, and they were illegally smuggling it. And the whole premise of the book is that these were like scallywags and it wasn't this higher patriotic calling. Again, wrapping a pure power, self-interested play in this bigger calling in order to sell it to a broader group of people.
Yeah, I mean,
Anyway,
movements.
Smugglers and Patriots, I think, is the name of it.
I mean, movements. A successful movement coalesces and creates, I guess, the modern word would be synergy, but creates alliances with all sorts of people. And I mean, Jefferson and Adams and Madison, like these were all guys of enlightenment and who had a lot of, they had an ideal, but that doesn't mean everybody in the coalition was. And and it's really always interesting to go back and see exactly how unpopular the revolution was. I mean, this was basically, a bunch of rich guys, elites, which we don't like that word anymore, but saying, let's try something new. And, and if you were a farmer trying to eke out a living, you're like, you want to fucking want me to do what? What are you, nuts?
Right.
And it's really kind of a miracle that the whole thing kind of happened.
Yeah.
I mean, and if you look at Washington's battles, it's neat stuff. But yeah, mass movements, things that become mass movements always have bad players. And, but once again, if you go to, models of elections and models of change, that economic self-interest is usually at the top of the list. So it's not really surprising that, if they felt they were being boned by the British crown, for their British half crowns, they said, yeah, we're with you. Right.
Right. So, okay, so let's dive in a bit into this power thing. So, I don't know, the slow unraveling of the Democratic Party is very interesting to me right now. You and I was looking at our last episode, and there was one part that jumped out as it was, we both were in agreement that the palace coup, let's call it, or this kind of growing voice in the Democratic Party, the leaks were definitely attributable, we believed, to Kamala Harris and to probably her allies throughout Washington. I don't know that. Have you seen anything to make you think that perhaps wasn't true? And the other side of that is that really what we're watching beyond, are we really watching Democrats putting country before party, or are we watching the internal divisions of a caucus that has multiple factions?
I think you're looking at this is going to sound a lot harsher than I mean it, and it's just kind of the reality, is that political parties, first and foremost, are never about principle. They're always about power. And they will change their views, and they may convince themselves that, I'm doing this for the right reasons. But they're always about power and about saving your own ass. And so for the opposite to be true, you have to believe that all these people saw this version of Biden in one form or another, or had aides that saw it, or knew a guy that saw it, and came back from the meeting and went, holy fuck, he's gone. He's a carrot. And the press, being shocked that there's gambling going on in the back room. And, famously, Biden used to look at the list. I've got reporters to call on. And, he was given the question and the answer, and on printed pages. And for all of a sudden, somebody like, Jake Tapper to pick on him saying, this is outrageous and this is amazing and the press needs to answer. You all guys all fucking knew. You all knew there was gambling going on in the back room, but now the jig is up, and you get to be statesmen now. And as the Republicans found out with Trump, in 2016, when the big guy's holding all the cards, fuck you. And so it's going to be interesting. I mean, the Harris leaks seem to have settled down because obviously, there was a very interesting New York Times article, I think 2 days ago, that said, Biden's new strategy to quell this is mutually assured destruction. If I don't get it, I will make sure I destroy you. Which is pretty good, by the way. It's a pretty good ploy, not particularly patriotic. And I think it would be different if this guy was corrupt or he was in a scandal, like a sex scandal or a money scandal. But you're talking about somebody who seems not with it. And they said, well, he's really with it between 10 and 4 every day. And, this is unpatriotic when it's not a difference in policy. It's not Republicans say Obama's going to turn us all into communist or whatever the fuck it is, or George Bush is going to introduce fascism. This goes to core competency. Is somebody online pointed out that if nuclear missiles are launched somewhere on the globe, the president has 6 minutes to respond. He's got the nuclear credit card with each day that he gets a new card with the key codes on it to launch a return strike. And there is a series of books, binders that open it up. And for each scenario, there are 6 options. And literally he has 6 minutes to say, respond, don't respond, total respond. And, it's scary that a guy who isn't with it, they're going to wake him up at, 1 a.m, which is what? 11 a.m. in Japan, in China, and say, you've got to decide whether you want to destroy half the world. I mean, not that I'm comfortable with anybody doing that, but holy fuck, I mean, that's totally irresponsible, and it's not even a close call.
I certainly think that that's a valid point. The point of that statement was that it was a retaliatory or a responsive nuclear strike. Do you recall the large amount of Republican attacks on General Millie when he was serving under Trump, and it came out? And the attacks on him actually happened, I believe, after Trump was out of office. All of this came out. But in the waning days of the Trump presidency, Millie actually went to the nuclear command and said, no authorization to release nuclear weapons should be done without my consultation, which actually
Right.
He's not part of that chain of command,
Right.
as far as I understand it. And so let me ask you, you don't have to give your personal opinion, but for people, what should be more troubling? That we may have a chief executive that with 6 minutes to go, we can't rely that he's going to be 100% with it. If it's 6 minutes to go, the missiles are already in the air from somewhere else, right? So it seems that we're at a bad situation. Or a chief executive where the leadership of the military, and not just them, I think 40-something now of his former staff, and several of them former military, by the way, were so convinced that he was bad for the country and potentially loose cannon enough to initiate a nuclear strike, that one of them felt it important to call that division of the chain of command and say, you should contact me in consultation before that action is executed. Do you see what I'm saying? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
to me, this election comes down to what is survivable for the U.S.
I don't think that. I think that the second case, and I'm only vaguely familiar with that, so I don't know what the details are. But I think the first is, that was just the most extreme thing. But if this guy doesn't know where he is, he doesn't know when his son died. He's got. if he doesn't have dementia, he's getting there really quick. And these aren't slips of the tongue. These are things that are kind of made up out of whole cloth. And Biden's always kind of been a bullshit artist and got caught. That's why he kind of had to drop out of his first campaign. And New York Times about a month ago ran all this crazy, my uncle was eaten by cannibals, maybe. I mean, what the fuck? But I think having somebody that is incompetent is having somebody that's dangerous isn't unconstitutional. Having somebody that's incompetent is, because that's 25th Amendment stuff. And the idea that hasn't even been seriously, maybe it has been seriously talked about, but the 25th Amendment in the Constitution is a purely political device where, and the way it's written is that the politicians and the cabinet members and their aides kind of conspire and say, the old man's lost it. He needs to be replaced. And that's the Constitution. Then it's got to be voted on and stuff. But that's the constitutional authority. It doesn't go to the courts. It doesn't go to the Supreme Court. It doesn't go to, and I think that having a guy that is incompetent, mentally incompetent, is much worse, because that creates a constitutional problem. I mean, the latter scenario is fucking crazy and dangerous, and it should scare the shit out of everybody. But it is not a constitutional problem. I think having somebody that is mentally incompetent is a constitutional problem.
Well, so there are a couple of things about that I've noticed about this Biden debate. None of the Democrats are saying that Biden should resign. So again, I actually agree with you. If we believe that he is mentally incompetent to fulfill the duties of the office, we shouldn't be having a conversation about whether or not he should be a nominee for the future. We should be having a conversation whether or not he should still be acting in that role. That's why I actually don't believe that the Democrats are putting country above party or any of that. Because none of them are saying that. What they're saying is that we're not going to win with him as our leader. They're actually saying the quiet part out loud. It's a purely political choice, and they're trying to force him out because of that, maybe. The other thing I would say is that, or the kind of the question that leads me to is, if you are under the assumption that he is incapable of being coherent enough to fulfill the duties, how is it there are these two dueling storylines around him? It's the same as he's either senile or he's the head of a mafia family, and he's thinking far in advance, and he's like this criminal mastermind. It's the same thing, this mutually assured destruction. How is that even possible if he's on his way out into senility? Do you know, I think the dueling storyline is the thing that.
No, go ahead. The dueling storyline is.
Go ahead. Yeah, no, I just think that there's been this ongoing dueling storyline, these dueling storylines for Biden for at least the last 2 years that I've seen. And they seem mutually exclusive, though they may not be. I'm surely open to hearing how they're not, but they seem mutually exclusive.
Yeah, they are mutually exclusive. I mean, I think the Biden crime family stuff is fucking stupid. Basically, it looks like, I think a fair reading of it is that Hunter and Biden's brothers are kind of small-time grifters who parlayed his access to power, which is hardly rare in American politics. And it's garden variety corruption that you kind of roll your eyes on, but that's kind of the way it works. But it's a different thing. And again, the Biden of Biden has always been a kind of frankly, a weirdo and kind of quirky, but kind of likable. And there is definitely that, old man, get off my lawn, fucking screaming, what are we going to do with pop energy right now? And even in his good moments, and clearly this is somebody decayed. There was a story yesterday that said as early as 22, after they passed the infrastructure bill, they wanted to send Biden across the country and promote all these projects, and they couldn't do it because he couldn't take the travel. And again, it is a White House, and again, people in the White House are politicians, all of them, every single one of them, from the fucking chef to the chief of staff. And clearly at some point, people in the upper echelons decided them holding on to power was more important than, forget the good of the country. It's more important than the good of Joe Biden. And if you believe things that, Biden's wife, Jill, and Hunter are kind of enabling him. There was a story yesterday about how Jill Biden, her office, insisted that the Navy band come up with a theme song for her when she comes into a room like Hail to the Chief, which is kind of insane, especially if you hear it. It's just like, and it's intoxicating, but at a certain point, I hope she would love her husband. I said to somebody else, I hope my wife and my kid, if I was humiliating myself like that, would come to me and put my best interest first. Because his legacy is, if he hangs on this and they can't get him, and he stays on the ballot and they can't get him off, and he becomes this drooling idiot who is this national joke, and Trump is reelected, he goes down as a punchline for the next 50 years. He becomes a metaphor for everything. And I think if you care about your legacy, or you care about, forget the country, if you care about yourself, if you care about what people are going to say about you, I think you don't want that to happen. He could have been known as the guy who vanquished Trump and returned normalcy. That would have been his legacy, and the perfect end to a 50-year career in public service. That's a pretty good fucking legacy, And the idea that you would want to hang on and be laughed at by everybody, yeesh.
I think you're raising a really good point. I think we're in total agreement on this. So there are two things that pop into my mind, and they're very much connected to this. The first is, I've been watching a lot, and I listened to that interview that Joe Biden did where somebody said he called himself the first black female president or something.
Right.
If you listen to the entire thing, I can actually follow his train of thinking, and I don't think that's what he said at all. I think it's very unfair.
I think that is unfair.
And I think it's very unfair what people have done with Trump, because I've seen them. Even last night, he was speaking and he said something about Hannibal Lecter again. And somebody tweeted, "Oh, hey media, are you going to comment on this?" Now, listen, if you listen to the guy, is he eloquent? Does he speak in a way that maybe we would like presidents to speak? We were kind of accustomed to the Obamas and the Romneys and people like that speaking. No, he speaks a little bit more like George W. Bush, who was a little bit like, man, this guy is not 100%, they're tripping over words, but speaking in public is difficult. But if you really listen, it's not what you're saying it is, right? They also did the same thing with this guy running for governor in North Carolina, who personally also sounds a little off the deep end for me politically. But they said he was calling for the killing of progressives. And if you listen to it, it's quite obvious that clip is cut. And I don't think that's what he was actually saying if you listen to the words. So part of me is thinking, are we just in an era now where people are hearing the reality to match the fact that people are seeing the reality that they want? And is Biden really not as deteriorated as we think he is? Now, he is certainly deteriorated. I watched the debate. I'll certainly tell you that he paused, he lost his train of thinking. I don't think that he can keep those facts. I don't think a debate is a accurate reflection of what it's like to be the president, first of all, but I certainly would acknowledge he's not operating at 80%. But I also don't think that. I also wonder, is he actually where people say he is? Just like Trump, is he as gone as people say he is as well? So I'll leave it there, but there's another piece I want to add to that after I get your thoughts on that. If you look at like what they're really saying, yeah, I mean, they're tripping over words. They're confusing divergent lines of talking. They're probably trying to say too much at the same time. And that's true of both of them, I think.
Yeah, I think there's two things. If you would run a transcript of our now I think we're making sense, but if you would run a transcript of our podcast and then read it back aloud, we would be like, are those guys drunk?
Totally.
But
and the answer would be sometimes.
Sometimes. And by the way, it's like when you write dialogue for movies or a lot of times or TV, or even when you write a political spot, what is grammatically correct is really bad. And that's always kind of a fight I've gotten in over the years about putting something that's grammatically incorrect. And, the staff says, man, we can't say that because it's the plural that did, and it's like, no, this is the way people talk.
Yeah. End the sentences with a preposition, goddammit. That's the point.
But I think beyond that, I thought the first black president thing, I knew what he was saying. But I think that there is a larger incoherency all the time with Biden in the debate. I mean, the debate didn't make any sense. And I think when you add to it this kind of, and I think the White House is calling them cheap fakes. And, we had 2 weeks of how all these videos are unfair to the real Joe Biden. And now they're proof of the real Joe Biden, which is kind of funny. Once again, the media being complicit into like, don't believe your eyes. Oh my God, look at this proof. But this kind of wandering, like this kind of thing, and his mouth open, and everybody who's had a friend or a family member that's gone through that, they know what that is, and it's not like I'm talking through stuff too quickly. There is a lack of coherency and a lack of grasp of facts and timelines. I mean, the her thing, which was interesting when her deposed Biden on mishandling of documents, and he said, "Yeah, we could maybe prosecute, maybe we couldn't, but you're going to go to court with a nice old guy who can't remember shit anymore, and didn't even know what year his son died or when he was vice president." And everybody lost their minds, and he sent out a big statement, and they released edited transcripts, which kind of confirmed what her said. And then everybody said, okay, release the audio tapes, which they never have and they never would, because it would show that. And there's certain things that you can remember and certain things that you can't, especially that are seminal points in your career. And you may get details wrong, and that's okay. But I think that there is this kind of drifting, and it's not one thing you can excuse. Like I said, I thought the first black female president, it was just him stumbling over himself. But when that is constant, combined with everything else that you see and hear, and you look at his schedule, and you have to say, oh, he's only around from 10 to 4. I mean, shit like that. And then he says, yeah, I need not to do anything after 8 o'clock at night and get more sleep. And you kind of going like, I don't want to hear that, I mean, me too, by the way.
Right.
I don't want to do shit after 8 o'clock at night. I want to get more sleep.
Right. No, so valid points. So then, taking what you said, then here's where I question what's next. There was a great podcast, and it was Malcolm Gladwell. Man, I can't remember what the name of his Revisionist History, and he was looking. He did. I think it was actually a series of episodes. It could have been just one, but he was basically looking at our cognitive bias for loss aversion. And he he looked at coaches in hockey because the dude's Canadian, so obviously he compared it to hockey. So he found that when teams were down by like 2 goals, the average time that was left in the game where the coach would pull the goalie to put another offensive player on the ice was like in the last 2 minutes, right? And what they found was if you had pulled the goalie earlier, according to this data, if you pulled the goalie earlier, your chances of success increase, but so do your chances of losing more goals because you no longer have a goalie in the net, right? So if there's a breakaway, you're going to get now the potentiality of the potential of having a bigger loss also increases. And what they found was even though you're increasing the likelihood of winning, coaches refused to pull the goalie until the last 2 minutes because they felt it was better to lose by 1 or 2 goals than to lose by 5.
Yeah.
And this has always struck me because it's like, dipshit, it's still a loss. You don't get like extra points because it was only 1 goal.
Yep.
But we have this bias in our brain. So part of me is thinking this. I listen to the Democrats, and a lot of them remind me of a quote I read, never negotiate with mediocrity. And it seems to me that they're willing to change now so that if there is a loss, they can say, but we did everything we could, right? Like we switched it up. They think they need to do something because they're so panicked that Joe Biden might lose. So I'm asking you, let's say we're halfway through the game. Let's say we're in the last quarter of the game, actually. And the right decision is to pull your goalie. Which decision is pulling the goalie? Sticking with Joe Biden, just like the Republicans have stuck with a convicted felon and adjudicated sexual harasser or whatever the actual charge was on that, and stick with Biden, or find somebody new and go all in on that person, regardless if that means you have to fight Joe Biden in public. You do the one thing that hurts the most to win. Which version is pulling the goalie and going for the win? And who gives a shit about how much you lose by as long as you try to win?
Yeah, it's pulling the goalie is replacing Biden. And I don't even see, as a hockey guy, I am absolutely a pull the goalie early person. Because it doesn't matter unless you're in some weird tiebreaker where you need the goal. But yeah, no, you always play for the win. And, one of the axioms of campaigns is playing it safe is losing. And the other piece is any of the kind of the technical problems that, we couldn't have a convention. Oh, we couldn't transfer the money. All that bullshit. Trust me, the lawyers will figure it out. And Democratic lawyers are notoriously malleable for creating new laws and then we'll adjudicate them after the election. And which, by the way, I think is right. But the problem that it's going to bite them in the ass when it's too late, if they keep Biden, and again, part of my assumptions here is that this is not some isolated incident. This is who he is, and it will get worse. And it will get worse dramatically as the pressure increases. That at a certain point, voters are going to say, they're going to look at Bob Casey, they're going to look at Gallego, they're going to look at people and say, wait a minute, this is your fucking guy? He's fucking insane, and he's crazy, and he's senile, and if you're backing him, I can't trust your judgment either. And I think that I always assumed that whether it was Biden or Trump, you were going to get, if it was Trump, you're going to get Democratic House and Senate. If it was Biden, you're going to get a Republican House and Senate because nobody likes either guy. And they're going to do that. I think that's different now if they stick with Biden. I think you may get a Republican sweep because voters will say, you think we're fools and we are not. Don't try to tell us this guy is okay. Because even if they say, well, the argument that you're going to make is a senile, incompetent Biden run by Ron Klain in the White House is better than Donald Trump. That is absolutely an absurd non-starter when you've got Kamala Harris, when you've got a bunch of other people. And I think that the danger they have are being too clever by a half with voters, and voters will punish them for it because it's disingenuous, you know? And I think that is the real danger. But I think that bites them in the ass real late, and there may not be enough brave souls. You know, but I mean, if you're a Bob Casey in Pennsylvania, if you're Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin, if you're whatever was it Slotkin in Michigan, you're like, pull the ripcord now, man, because whoever you're going to get is going to be better. And again, you know, I mean, I'm not a big Harris fan, but she's going to be better because she will be able to run a competent. You won't have to hold your breath every time she steps up to a podium because she knows the drill. And whatever you think of her political skills, they're significant. I mean, you know, she was, you know, people forget. Sure. I'm gonna do my little Harris boomlet here. She ran against the incumbent for San Francisco DA, beat the party endorsed incumbent. She was not endorsed in the Attorney General's race, and she was outspent in the Attorney General's race, and she won that. She parlayed that with a bunch of other wannabes into a U.S. Senate seat, and then against, frankly, all odds, she became a sneeze away from President of the United States. And so forget her goofiness, and I didn't fall out of the bizarreness that she has. When you look at what she has accomplished, this is a person of considerable political skill and who has accomplished more than 99% of the rest of the fucking politicians in the country. And so, you know, maybe she's not the perfect candidate, but it's not like she's drooling, man. I mean, you know, she has political skill.
Yeah, no. I mean, you don't get to where she is without being a very shrewd person, right?
Yeah.
So,
and shrewd and
listen, you've convinced me.
Yeah.
I mean, you've convinced me. I do think it's interesting enough. I think death by 1,000 cuts is far worse than making your bed and lying in it. Like, you make a decision and you go full force in that decision. Right now, what the party's doing is untenable. It's funny. Somebody posted on. Yeah.
So like untenable party things. So we had two really interesting elections in Europe last week. One I will kind of crow a little bit about when people complain about the way the way we elect officials in this country, and the Electoral College, whatever. But so if you look at the British elections, and Labour won a huge landslide.
Generational shift, really.
Yeah, and you know, and people are trying to say, well, they only increased their vote totals by 1.4%. Fuck off. I mean, you know, it's the first time they've had power since 2010. But what was interesting about that, and I'm actually reading this, is that the Liberal Democrats, which are going to be part of that coalition, got 12.2% of the vote and got 71 seats. The Reform Party, which was kind of the anti-immigration kind of nationalist party, got 14.3% of the vote, so 2.5 points higher than Liberal Democrats, but only got 4 seats. So the Liberal Dems got 71 seats for getting less votes than the Reform. And I just kind of throw that out there as like, you know, be careful what you ask for. But in terms of like parties making choices, you saw that in the French election, where the right was in not a great place, but a decent place to win elections, and it looked like a miscalculation for Macron. And basically, the top three parties conspired and said, okay, you guys drop out, you do this, you do that. And basically, they put the fix in for the next election, and they manipulated the process to get this kind of center-left coalition, which I think is going to be a lot of problems because I think some of the players are anti-Semitic, and the communists are always crazy and stuff. And good luck governing that. But I think you saw a party that saw, their chances going down the fucking drain, and they just pulled the plug, and they cut their own people off, and they said, no, fuck you, you're not running anymore. We're going to, and it was this really kind of super hardball politics, that made my, political heart go pitter patter.
Nice. What happened in France and England is it's certainly probably been the most interesting because I'm a little tired of the Biden stuff. So for the last week, it's certainly, I think, been the most interesting political news. Maybe Modi going to visit Putin is up there as well. But
yeah.
Okay, so it's interesting that you brought up some of the Senate races. I think that's a very powerful argument. I saw that Gallego raised $10.4 million in the last quarter. I mean, he's crushing the money. I guess he's raised about $33 million. And of that last, I don't know, I have it here somewhere. So just off the top of my head, of that last 10.4, something like 95% of it has been less than $100 increments, and 50% of it was first-time donors. I'm pretty sure I have this here somewhere.
Yeah.
But,
I'd be curious how much was out of state.
I mean,
I don't know. I'm not watching that closely.
But for Lake,
but Kerry Lake is toxic.
Shy of Biden dragging Gallego down, maybe. But even that, I don't know that that's going to matter in Arizona. I think it's certainly going to matter for Tester. Yeah.
Yeah, which Biden could drag all these people down because if you were Gallego and you are, oh no, I'm voting for Joe Biden, he's my guy, and it's like, what does it say about your judgment when you're voting for the carrot?
Right.
And I think that hits Lake. I think he's probably okay because Lake is so toxic. I mean, talk about somebody destroying a fucking political career. I mean, it's like she was like the person on the burning roof, and they say the roof is burning. We're going to send help, and she's like, "No, go away, I'm fine." And it's like, "No, go away, I'm fine." And finally, people go, "Fuck you, you're crazy." She had a bunch of opportunities to kind of backtrack and become normal, and and again, she started with this incredible goodwill, because she was the beloved local trusted news source, and she just burned it to the ground, which is kind of funny. I mean, you kind of enjoy that kind of thing.
I think she was an Obama supporter as well. I've read some articles about how quite the shift that she made. Like she was a supporter of Obama. It's funny that you say that as well, by the way. In 2020, didn't the down ballot Republicans outperform even though Trump lost?
Some places they did, some places they didn't.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's a case by case kind of thing.
In a presidential cycle, do you? I mean, it seems to make sense that the entire ballot is kind of painted with the broad brush of the presidential race during the presidential cycle. But do you think that they would be that closely aligned in somewhere that it seems to me Arizona is trending towards blue, from purple to blue at the statewide races. Do you see him being that affected by Biden regardless? Even if he just said, I'm going to support the nominee of our party, he doesn't have to say Biden's name, right? I'm curious how you can distance yourself without turning your back on the presidential candidate. And that's something for all of them, Tester, Casey.
Yeah, it's tricky because the alternatives are Trump and RFK Jr. The best person ever to kind of play that game was Pat Toomey, who was a U.S. senator,
Yeah.
two-term U.S. senator from Pennsylvania, and in 2016 they said, "Who you voting for, Hillary or Trump?" He's like, "Well, I'm not going to say. I'm not sure. I'm weighing it out." But he played this game in the press. The press and his opponent let him get away with it. And he narrowly won re-election by the way, against a terrible candidate and a terrible opposition. But he kind of got away with that. I don't think you can get away with that now, but I didn't think you could get away with it back then either. So it shows you what I know. But I think it's tough. I mean, do you say? I mean, something I would test drive is that, well, I think Trump is so bad for the country, I am going to support Joe Biden because I'm fine with Kamala Harris being president. That is an interesting, and as we know, it's too late to get Joe off there, but I'm confident that he'll do the right thing and resign. And Harris, I would test drive the shit out of that and see how that worked, because I think it's a fairly, it's probably true. And by the way, the truth might be a pretty good case to trot out on this. It's like, well, I think Trump's a disaster. I think Biden's lost it, but I'm fine with Harris, and so I'm going to vote for Biden because I think we're going to get Harris, and I think the next Congress, if not, they will try to remove him from office. I mean, you could figure out how many steps and how much detail you want to put on that. But I would think that, by the way, and it's going to be really interesting to see who Trump puts as his VP, because I think his VP is going to be, I think I was on record saying it's going to be Stefanik, at least Stefanik. I thought that's who it was going to be. Now I'm not so sure. Now I think it might be Rubio. But I'm going to stick with Stefanik. But I think that, Stefanik is, like Rubio is ready to drive. Rubio, the cake is baked. And, he goes around the country and speaks Spanish, and he's a serious guy, and especially on foreign policy, he's got really good grasp of detail stuff. And so I think that's fine. Whether she's a much more interesting choice and a much more, I think, potentially dynamic choice, but I think she's a less safe, less tested choice. And I think that, if you're going to do Joe Biden is crazy and Kamala kind of fell out of the coconut tree, maybe Rubio makes more sense. But I'll still say Stefanik. I made my bed.
So
I went for that early
see
money. I like the odds on the early money.
In the Hill today, they have a headline in an interview. Marla Maples says she's open to being Trump's VP pick. In case you didn't see that coming, she's open to it. She's saying that she's willing to drop all of the important things that she's doing. She will entertain the idea. It's funny. I posted yesterday. So yeah,
she's going to give up a chance of getting a Nobel Prize to do that. Amazing.
Well, her important work on nuclear fusion will have to wait until after this coming term. So, side note, remind me to tell you sometime about the time in LA that I was at a party with her. The guy who writes all like the self-help books from like the Buddhism perspective, he's been on like Oprah Winfrey and stuff. Really famous guy.
I know who you mean.
Man.
I don't know the name, but I know who you mean.
Yeah. Him, like the number 2 to the Dalai Lama, and this French guy whose house it was at, that I'm relatively certain the entire thing was a grift, but anyway, interesting night. Have to tell you sometime. I posted last night on Twitter that about the VP pick. I think Trump's ideal candidate is himself, his ideal running mate. Like, he doesn't really like other people. He wants himself, right?
Yeah.
What are the long shot what's the long shot possibility that he gets Ivanka to run with him?
None.
None.
Um,
It's interesting that you say that, because I think it's none as well, but I actually think that one might work for him to a degree that he would want to do that. And it might actually help him with Suburban Housewives. Rubio helps him maybe in the Hispanic community, maybe helps him in Florida, maybe, but I don't really think he needs that help. So, yeah, I don't know. Okay, all right. So none.
I think
agreed.
Rubio's, because he is bilingual, and because the big part, when you look at big part of Trump's coalition currently against Biden is Latino. I think sending Trump through. I mean, people forget Pennsylvania has a significant Latino population. Connecticut has a significant Latino population. Virginia has a significant, and like Virginia and North. I think that's powerful, and I also think it's generational. And frankly, I mean, forgetting, a little. And by the way, disclaimer or caveat that that I worked for Rubio in 2016. But he's kind of a policy wonky guy. And he really understands nuts and bolts of legislation in a way that, Trump and Biden and Harris just do not. He can go and opine about talking about Bretton Woods agreements and, and that kind of crazy crap, or that kind of, esoteric crap, and he can do that. And I think that is a plus for him. But
he strikes me as not terribly charismatic or charming, which I think suits Trump, because Trump doesn't like to be upstage. So he's looking for another boring Pence type, right? That's why I always felt like Vivek and Trump could never be on the same ticket, because Vivek, whether you like him or dislike, the guy is charming. He's or charismatic. I don't know if he's charming, but he's got something that's appealing to people. He's very engaging in the way that he speaks and stuff. So I always felt like Trump doesn't want to be upstaged by this dude. Okay, all right. So your money's still on Stefanik, huh? Okay.
Yeah, even though I don't like that bet right now, but I'll keep that. Okay. I went for the early money on it, so I'll live with it.
I'm going to drop two things as we kind of sum up here. The first one, did you see that Google searches for Project 2025 there are more Google searches for that than Taylor Swift and the NFL?
Yeah. I mean,
do you think this is going to affect do you think that Project 2025 is going to be the bigger issue for Trump than anything else? Convictions I don't think matter. Is Project 2025 going to be the thing that he has to deal with? Interesting. Okay.
No, because
do you think there's no there?
I mean, here's the thing there's no fucking there. I mean, if you knew the people at the Heritage Foundation, I mean, it's this giant goofy conservative wish list. It is valuable in the sense for Democrats and activists, because it gets them to do their whole conspiracy theory thing. It is almost the mirror image of when AOC did the Green New Deal thing and about having to we'll eliminate air travel ultimately. It's that same kind of think tank, goofball, activist, masturbatory pornography that nobody fucking cares about. And I think it serves a purpose as a like the Green New Deal. It serves a purpose to be weaponized, but in terms of it being something that, well, I know Joe Biden is senile and he's drooling in the last debate, and he thinks Harris is actually a potted plant, but Project 2025, which I haven't read, which is 900 fucking pages of bizarreness. I'm going to vote on that. I mean, that's not going to happen to anybody, honestly. I mean,
okay.
And by the way,
All right. And
Trump,
then
the first thing Trump did was denounce it. I don't know who the fuck these people are, whether he does or not, whether that was disingenuous or not. The fact that, he cut that rope so quickly, cut that cord so quickly, says that they know it's a potential problem they don't want to have to deal with.
Okay. All right. By the way, I do think that people have fact checked him on that. He does know who they are, and like 10 of the people that were orchestrators of that are around him all the time. I think
but what I mean, these are low level. The Heritage Foundation and all these things. If Trump cared about policy, then you could say, oh, okay. He doesn't care about policy, and he's never cared about policy.
No, but I don't think the concern for people for Project 2025 should be Trump gives a shit about Project 2025. I think it would be the same thing as 2016 to 2020, which is, yeah, he doesn't give a shit about the policies of the United States. He will do what the people around him who continue to perpetuate what's good for him, what serves them in a transactional environment. I don't think he gives a shit about immigration. Truthfully, I don't really think it affects him, except for who he's going to hire to do the catering in one of his hotels. I don't think he gives a shit. But the reality is that since when you are hands off and you have relationships with people, you say, yeah, man, go do whatever. Don't bother me with it.
Yeah.
I think that's from a policy side. I think that would be the concern, is that not that he's going to be a forceful advocate for it. It's that he's going to be hands off and say, yeah, you go do whatever you want in those agencies and do all these things and I'll sign it, whatever, sure. As long as it doesn't hurt me. The moment it hurts me, I'm going to stop doing it. So they're going to, you know what I mean? Like, it's transactional.
Well, yeah, but I think that if the bar is, I won't do it when it hurts me, that would speak to popularity, and he's going to do whatever is popular and not going to do what isn't popular. So the kind of question becomes moot because he is so transactional, but which, by the way, I think is wrong. And I think there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done and some heavy, hard lifts, which you're not going to see, which you haven't seen and you're not going to see. You haven't seen a hard lift for 20 years plus.
All right. We'll leave it there. There were a couple things. Instead of doing what I was going to do, let me ask you, we have a contest right now. That's since we were talking about Kari Lake. Lake in Arizona, over under 56.34% of the vote against Lamb. Would you take the over or the under?
So Lamb gets.
No, will Kari Lake get over or under 56.34% of the vote?
Over.
Okay. All right. Taking the over on that. Well, okay. So let me ask a question then. Will Mark Lamb get over or under 28.96% of the vote?
Over.
Okay, cool. So you're looking at like what, a 60-40 split?
I think it's going to be like 63-37. Like.
Okay.
Because he has no money and apparently he's not that great of a candidate, and she's just going to have the gravity of inertia is going to be in her favor.
Right.
But she's
all right. The last thing I would say, Chris, is we want everyone who sees this to subscribe and hit the bell icon so that they will be notified of our next thing. I will talk to you next week from the convention in Milwaukee. What's Milwaukee? Is that where Laverne and Shirley were from? Were they from Milwaukee? They were, right?
Very good, yeah. Laverne and Shirley and Lenny and Squiggy were from Milwaukee, and they worked in the beer bottling plant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. My sister asked me, like, what's in Milwaukee? What are you going to do while you're there? And I was like, isn't that where like beer's from? Wasn't that like Laverne and Shirley were at a beer bottling factory or something, weren't they?
Yeah. My first big career win, going back into the Middle Ages of 1986, was in Wisconsin, and I was in Milwaukee and Madison all the time. And it's a lovely city. By the way, Wisconsin has the highest, so I get this right, it's the highest beer consumption per capita in the country and the highest brandy consumption by volume. So in Wisconsin, there's more brandy drunk than in Texas and California and New York.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, check your when you go.
Well, I mean,
where do you see how people drink there in the winter, right? I mean, holy, I mean, it's something.
So maybe with climate change, the something good will come from it. There'll be a lot less cirrhosis of the liver in Wisconsin, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
All
right,
man. All right, I'll see you next week. All
Sounds
right,
good.
thanks, Chris.
You bet.
Bye.